Hello and welcome to the World Bank 15th Tanzania Economic Update. This edition comes to you from sunny Dar es Salaam and is entitled Raising the Bar. Today we have come together to delve deeper into the report to glean key insights into achieving Tanzania's development agenda. We have a panel of 3 distinguished leaders and thinkers who will help us to deepen our understanding of Tanzania's economy in the global context. And with Tanzania's recent attainment of lower middle income status, we will ask pertinent questions around where we go next as a nation as we strive towards Tanzania's development vision, which includes attaining middle income status by 2025. Now, without further ado, let's set the stage with opening remarks from the World Bank's Country Director, Mara Warwick. Karibu sana.
Distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, members of the press. As we were finalizing the preparation of this 15th edition of the Tanzania Economic Update, the news came to us that we had lost Professor Benno Ndolo, a very dear friend and colleague of many World Bank Group staff. We are still mourning his passing, and I would like to dedicate a few minutes to honor his memory. Many World Bank Group staff had the special privilege to interact with Professor Ndolo, or Benno, as he was known to many of us, either while he was working at the World Bank or the Bank of Tanzania, or in the many international development activities to which he was so highly devoted. A powerhouse in development economics and a remarkable leader with unwavering commitment to the socio-economic transformation of Tanzania. Benno was always at the heart of our work in Africa. This was all thanks to his affability, humility, and immense generosity to share his time and knowledge with others. Professor Ndolo made important contributions to the development of Tanzania and beyond. From the 1980s, where he led crucial initiatives that helped to shape the country's reform agenda, to his move to the World Bank in Tanzania and then Washington, D.C., through his return to Tanzania in 2008 as the governor of the Bank of Tanzania. He collaborated with local and international stakeholders, including the private sector, to champion significant reforms in key areas such as financial inclusion, human development, business environment, and infrastructure. Indeed, Tanzania's leading position in the global financial inclusion agenda cannot be delinked from Professor Ndolo's personal dedication to this cause. His retirement in 2018 did not faze Professor Ndolo's passion for the causes he championed. He joined Oxford University and continued to collaborate on important initiatives with many partners, including the World Bank. All of us at the World Bank Group will truly miss Professor Ndolo's intellectual leadership and championing of critical development issues. But most of all, we will miss his passion for research and for mentoring the next generation of African economists. He touched the lives and careers of so many, and he will be truly missed. We send our deep condolences to Mama Mariam Ndolo and their children, Ndulika, Lindu, and Sarah, and all members of his family for their loss. May Professor Ndolo rest in eternal peace. Ladies and gentlemen, the World Bank produces economic updates in many of our member countries, including Tanzania. Produced twice a year, each edition of the Tanzania Economic Update presents the World Bank's independent assessment of the current economic performance and outlook, accompanied by a special topic chapter which focuses on a development challenge relevant for realizing Tanzania's aspirations. As its special topic, the 15th edition of the Tanzania Economic Update, entitled Raising the Bar, Achieving Tanzania's Development Vision, takes Tanzania's recent achievement of becoming a lower middle-income country in July 2020 as the point of departure, and takes a forward look on what it will take to achieve Tanzania's development aspirations as stated in the Tanzania Development Vision 2025. The discussion is framed around 3 fundamental pillars: sustaining growth over the medium term, strengthening the inclusiveness of growth to reduce poverty, and fostering economic mobility and economic security. Tanzania's graduation to LMIC status presents an opportunity to assess the quality of past growth and to develop a roadmap to guide its successful transition to middle-income status in order to achieve qualitative development goals that extend beyond income per capita. A key purpose of our Tanzania economic updates is to stimulate public debate on development issues. As on previous occasions, we are honored today to have a panel of eminent practitioners and thought leaders to participate in the discussion. And I would personally like to thank the panel for their presence here today. My colleagues Miguel and Bill will present the report findings in detail, but let me take a few minutes to highlight some of the World Bank's perspectives on the following two questions that are addressed in this economic update. What are Tanzania's growth and poverty prospects in a challenging global environment? And what are policy priorities for Tanzania to successfully make the transition to a middle-income country? Firstly, the growth and poverty outlook. The COVID-19 pandemic continues to exact an enormous humanitarian and economic toll worldwide. The impact of the pandemic on human lives has been enormous. The global economy contracted by an estimated 4.3% in 2020, and while a 3.8% rebound is projected in 2021, worldwide economic output is expected to remain well below pre-pandemic levels over the medium term. Tanzania has fared relatively well compared to its regional peers, but economic growth has slowed, and poverty is expected to have increased. The real GDP growth rate fell from 5.8% in 2019 to an estimated 2% in 2020, and per capita growth turned negative for the first time in over 25 years. The government took early measures to alleviate the adverse health and economic impacts of COVID-19. However, these measures were moderate and shorter-lived relative to those implemented in many other countries in the region. While a recession was avoided in 2020, the absence of official information on COVID-19 infection and mortality rates complicates efforts to assess the effectiveness of the public health response. Moreover, Tanzania's economic outlook remains highly uncertain, while the shock of the pandemic is expected to slow poverty reduction. Given this uncertainty, we expect real GDP for 2021 to fall in the range 3 to 5.3%, with realization on the upper side of this range hinging on a strong recovery in global economic activity, supported by the rollout of a vaccine globally, and hard work on domestic policy side to support the recovery. But every cloud has a silver lining. Tanzania has several macroeconomic advantages that favor a swift recovery. It is one of the few economies in the region that avoided recession in 2020. The country's low risk of debt distress and the low fiscal deficits offer some space to prudently utilize debt financing. International reserves are relatively high, while a combination of high gold prices and low oil prices is bolstering the terms of trade. I would like to highlight here the importance of bold and credible implementation of policies to save lives and livelihoods and to support Tanzania's economic recovery and growth beyond 2021. First, saving lives requires a continued focus on the prevention, detection, and treatment of COVID-19, supported by data transparency and timely reporting. Greater transparency and enhanced surveillance of COVID-19 and other communicable diseases could improve early detection, containment, and public outreach. Establishing an internal process for planning a COVID-19 inoculation campaign would position the government to move swiftly as new vaccines become available. We would strongly advise the government to proactively engage with technical partners to prepare a plan for deploying a COVID-19 vaccine in Tanzania. Second, protecting livelihoods requires a thorough assessment of existing support programs and their adjustment to maximize the impact on vulnerable households and firms. Tanzania has a very well-established and well-run productive social safety nets program, which has been featured strongly in the recent World Bank report, The State of Economic Inclusion in 2021. But its coverage remains limited. The government should consider scaling up this and other social protection programs to reduce the vulnerability of poor households. In the short term, the government could strengthen measures to protect jobs and support micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. Third, a robust recovery in 2021 and beyond will require reforms that improve the business environment. Key areas include facilitating the adoption of digital solutions for business resilience and growth, expanding access to finance amongst micro, small, and medium enterprises, and addressing the challenges of the informal sector. The blueprint for regulatory reforms to improve the business environment identifies numerous permits, licenses, and procedures to eliminate, but its implementation has been incomplete. The renewed emphasis on private sector as engine of growth and jobs is welcomed. This would require major policy reforms implemented decisively and credibly. Which brings me to the issue of the medium-term development agenda and achieving Tanzania's development vision. In July 2020, Tanzania made a remarkable milestone by achieving lower middle-income country status after 2 decades of sustained growth and investment, supported by stable macroeconomic conditions, rich natural endowments, and its strategic geographical position. While reaching LMIC status is a laudable achievement, Tanzania's larger development agenda remains unfinished. The Tanzania Development Vision, TDV 2025, envisages Tanzania as a middle-income country with well-developed human capital, an ample supply of high-quality livelihood opportunities, and broad-based gains in living standards. To realize this vision, Tanzania's progress in boosting income levels, narrowing the infrastructure gap, and improving social indicators must be complemented by widespread improvements in poverty reduction, shared prosperity, and other qualitative development indicators. Rapid population growth, slow and uneven job creation, low levels of education, and limited access to educational and employment opportunities, especially amongst women and girls, have reduced the inclusiveness of Tanzania's economic expansion, blunting its effect on poverty reduction. In this context, sustaining a robust expansion while ensuring that economic growth generates inclusive opportunities and broad gains in living standards will be critical to realize the ambitious objectives of the TDV 2025. It is indeed a cruel irony that Tanzania has crossed this important economic threshold in the year of the worst global crisis in post-war history. It makes the road ahead even harder. Realizing the goals of the TDV 2025 will require a concerted effort to restore the economy's growth momentum while expanding access to economic opportunities. The COVID-19 crisis has highlighted the unpredictability of global economic trends, and Tanzania's ability to maintain its LMIC status will depend on strengthening its resilience to shocks while investing in human capital. My colleagues Miguel and Bill will elaborate on the major findings and messages during their presentations. I also look forward to fruitful discussion on Tanzania's priorities and challenges in becoming a thriving middle-income country from our esteemed panelists. Asante, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mara Warwick, for your insightful opening remarks that have truly set the stage for today's event. Now, as you know, listeners, the economic update is usually presented in 2 parts. The first part, economic performance of the preceding period, and the second part is usually a topic of strategic significance to the country. In this case, achieving Tanzania's Development Vision 2025. Now, we encourage you to get online, follow us, to join the discussion using hashtag Tanzania Economic Update on all our social media channels. Now, let's move on to a short video that illustrates the key messages of the first part of the report.
The emergence of the COVID-19 pandemic plunged the global economy into a recession in 2020. While Tanzania avoided a recession in 2020, the pandemic has significantly impacted lives and livelihoods across the country, with economic growth estimated to have slowed to 2.0% in 2020. The economic outlook remains highly uncertain and the risks are tilted on the downside. GDP is expected to grow by between 3.0 and 5.3% in 2021, below its long-run potential growth rate of about 6%. There is cause for cautious optimism. Tanzania has several macroeconomic advantages that would support a robust policy response to counter the negative economic effects of the pandemic. Tanzania's growth prospects depend on both the successful worldwide rollout of a COVID-19 vaccine and the implementation of sound domestic policies to accelerate the recovery of economic activity. In the short term, the government should strengthen its public health response, including vaccination, and strengthen measures to protect jobs and support micro, small and medium enterprises, and expand social safety nets. Improving the investment climate and fiscal management are needed to underpin and sustain a robust growth beyond 2021.
The video that you just watched and all other Tanzania Economic Update resources are available on our landing page, worldbank.org/Tanzania Economic Update. We shall now follow this video with a presentation from Miguel Saldariaga, an economist with the World Bank, who will delve a little bit deeper into the economic outlook. Welcome, Miguel.
Good morning, everyone. Karibu. The first part of the 15th edition of the Tanzania Economic Update presents recent economic developments and the medium-term outlook for the Tanzanian economy. And I will share with you the key messages and findings of this part of the report. First, what has been the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on growth and poverty in Tanzania? The COVID-19 pandemic has plunged the global economy into recession in 2020, and the pace of recovery remains uncertain, both among advanced and emerging economies. The disease continues to exact an enormous and mounting toll in human lives, and the disruption of education systems has slowed human capital accumulation, which could negatively impact the productivity of an entire generation. The global economy contracted by an estimated 4.3% in 2020, and while a 4% rebound is projected for 2021, worldwide economic output is expected to remain well below pre-pandemic trends over the near term. Tanzania has fared relatively well compared to its regional peers, and the country avoided a recession in 2020. But economic growth has slowed significantly. Real GDP growth fell from 5.8% in 2019 to an estimated 2% in 2020. Per capita growth turned negative for the first time in over 25 years. The global economic slowdown has adversely affected export-oriented industries, especially tourism and traditional exports, and caused a drop in foreign investment. Gold has been the sole export to benefit from the crisis, as international gold prices rose sharply between 2019 and 2020. Although the government did not impose stringent mobility restrictions, the pandemic prompted firms and consumers to adopt precautionary behaviors, hindering domestic demand. Meanwhile, steep declines in production consumption and imports have reduced fiscal revenue. The pandemic has also compounded pre-existing challenges in the financial sector, and the share of non-performing loans on bank balance sheets continues to be high, while the growth of credit to the private sector has slowed significantly. The COVID-19 pandemic has impacted lives and livelihoods across the country. Available high-frequency official data combined with World Bank-led household and business surveys, reveal the severe toll on firms and livelihoods. During June and July 2020, the World Bank conducted a COVID-19 business pulse survey, covering 1,000 small and medium enterprises in Tanzania. The survey data indicate that about 100,000 formal jobs were lost in June 2020, and another 2.2 million non-farm informal workers suffered income losses. Tanzania's employed and informal non-farm microenterprises tend to be especially exposed to economic shocks, as they often have limited savings to draw on in a crisis. Firms reported an average decline in sales of 36%, which has jeopardized the solvency of more than 3/4 of small and medium enterprises. Moreover, the most affected firms reported not benefiting from any type of government support. In particular, the pandemic has taken a heavy toll on the tourism sector, a major driver of exports and economic growth in Tanzania. According to a survey of private sector operators conducted by IFC and Dahlberg Advisory in October 2020, the tourism industry is projected to lose 77% of its revenue in 2020 and 21% and 50% of direct jobs. Before the pandemic, almost all businesses reported that their operations were stable or growing, whereas now 80% report being suspended or partially open. Utilization rates have fallen across all tourism subsectors from 49 to 60% in late 2019 to just 9% in mid-2020, and sales have plunged by as much as 85% among small firms, which represent 80% of Tanzanian tourist firms. The loss of income among workers in tourism and related sectors is weakening domestic demand, and informal workers with little savings and limited credit access are facing the prospect of a sharply reduced consumption. The crisis could push an additional 600,000 people below the national poverty line. While the poverty headcount ratio at national poverty line has declined modestly over time, falling from 28.2% of population in 2012 to 26.1% in 2019, Tanzania's rapid population growth rate has caused the number of people living below the national poverty line to steadily increase. In 2020, the pandemic-induced economic slowdown caused the poverty rate to rise to an estimated 27.2%, compounding the effect of population growth on the absolute number of people living in poverty. Because a large share of Tanzania's population is close to the poverty line, even a mild economic shock can push numerous households into poverty. The impact of the crisis has been especially acute among households that rely on self-employment and informal microenterprises in urban areas. Second, what is the economic outlook for Tanzania? Tanzania's economic outlook remains highly uncertain, and growth prospects hinge on the successful global rollout of a COVID-19 vaccine, combined with sound domestic policies to foster a swift recovery. Tanzania's real GDP growth is projected to grow by between 3.0 and 5.3% in 2021, below its long-run potential growth rate of about 6%. However, this baseline projection reflects the available data as of February 15, 2021, and in the context of the pandemic, it is subject to considerable uncertainty. The trajectory of COVID-19 continues to evolve, and a resurgence in infection rates is being reported across much of the world. Even if Tanzania contains its domestic outbreak, a worldwide health crisis that continues well into 2021 could continue to suppress economic activity. Tanzania's tourism sector is especially vulnerable to a downside scenario in which the pandemic persists. Moreover, poverty reduction is expected to slow, and the national poverty rate is projected to fall to 27% in 2021, down slightly from 2020, but still above its 2019 level. Due to rapid population growth, the number of people living below the national poverty line is projected to increase by 320,000 in 2021. The quality of the post-crisis recovery will shape poverty dynamics in 2021 and beyond. Third, and finally, how to accelerate and sustain the pace of recovery in Tanzania. Government actions to protect lives, livelihoods, and the future will influence the pace of the recovery. The World Bank recommends a framework for responding to the COVID-19 pandemic and associated economic crisis based on 3 pillars. This framework focuses on protecting lives, livelihoods, and the future. Measures to protect lives include preventing, detecting, and treating COVID-19. Measures to protect livelihoods as economic activity slows include support to households and firms, especially in vital economic sectors, and efforts to sustain key government functions. Measures to protect the future include investments to accelerate the recovery and strengthen resilience to future shocks. Tanzania has several macroeconomic advantages that favor a swift recovery. It is one of the few economies in the region not to experience a contraction in 2020. The country's low risk of debt distress offers some space to prudently utilize debt financing, and the government fiscal position has improved over the last 4 years, with the fiscal deficit around 2% of GDP. International reserves are relatively high at about 5 months of import coverage, while a combination of high gold prices and low oil prices is bolstering the terms of trade. Inflation is among the lowest in East Africa. To capitalize on these advantages and lay the foundation for robust and sustainable long-term growth, the government should seize the opportunity to advance its structural reform agenda. The government has already approved several important measures, including the blueprint for regulatory reform and the arrears management strategy. Accelerating the implementation of these initiatives while taking additional steps to improve the business climate for domestic and foreign investors will position the Tanzanian economy to capitalize on the anticipated global recovery. Increasing the availability and quality of information on both the domestic spread of COVID-19 and the evolution of macroeconomic indicators will strengthen the government's ability to plan and implement effective policies. Reporting the number of new COVID-19 cases, including deaths and recoveries, and releasing timely national accounts data could help ensure the success of the public health response, while also bolstering market sentiment by signaling the government's determination to counter the external shock induced by the pandemic. Thank you very much for joining this presentation. Asante.
Thank you very much, Miguel, for your presentation. We have another short video now to ease you into the second part of the report, which discusses achieving the Tanzania Development Vision 2025, and which will also be the focus of our panel discussion shortly. What are the opportunities and challenges for Tanzania? And what are the priority policy areas? Here we go.
Tanzania attained a gross national income per capita of $1,080 in 2019 and graduated to lower middle income country LMIC status in July 2020, thanks to a solid income growth over the last 2 decades, sustained macroeconomic stability and rich natural endowments, together with a strategic geographic position. However, economic growth has not been inclusive enough, with almost 50% of the country's citizens still living below the international poverty line of $1.90 per day. High population growth, slow and uneven job creation, low levels of education, and limited access opportunities have hindered the inclusiveness of economic growth and its impact on poverty reduction. Based on Tanzania's unique opportunities and challenges, and incorporating lessons from the experience of successful LMICs, Tanzania's next level of development goals can be framed around 3 strategic pillars: sustaining growth over the medium term, improving the inclusiveness of growth to reduce poverty, and fostering upward economic mobility and economic security. Within these pillars, the 15th Tanzania Economic Update proposes prioritizing 5 policy areas: accelerating productive investment, prioritizing human capital development, enabling agricultural transformation, leveraging digital technology, and building public sector institutions and capacities, including the capacity to leverage partnerships with the private sector. Bold actions in these areas will be essential to engender inclusive and sustainable growth and to fully transition to a middle-income economy.
We're now firmly into the second part of the report, and it is my pleasure to welcome Bill Battle, lead country economist for the World Bank, who will present on achieving Tanzania's Development Vision 2025. Welcome, Bill.
Thanks, Miranda. Let's turn now for more detail on the TEU special topic, Raising the Bar, which is a forward look at the development vision and goals that Tanzania has set for itself and what it will take to get there. As mentioned, Tanzania reached lower middle income status in 2020, following years of consistent income growth and putting Tanzania in a group of roughly 50 other lower middle income countries. Reaching this milestone is an important achievement for the country. It's also a great opportunity to look forward, to consider the development vision that Tanzanian policymakers set for the country in the Vision 2025 document, and ask what should be the priorities for government policies and spending to best manage the transition to middle income status. The goals the country has set for itself are much more holistic than simply a certain level of average income. They include well-developed human capital, an ample supply of high-quality livelihood opportunities, and broad-based gains in living standards. Against this backdrop, the TEU Special Topic Chapter offers our view on framing a discussion around raising the bar, going beyond a focus on growth rates and average income levels, and recognizing that what got Tanzania to this important GNI per capita achievement won't necessarily get it to the higher bar of a successful middle-income country. More will clearly be needed. And we think this special topic is especially timely given the ongoing focus on preparing a new 5-year development plan. Now, considering the Tanzanian context and looking at experiences of countries that have successfully transitioned to middle income status, like Vietnam, Ghana, and Kenya, we think it's useful for the authorities to frame the next leap of development for the country around the 3 broad pillars that Mara described at the opening. Let's look briefly at each of these 3 pillars. Pillar 1 recognizes the importance of economic growth for poverty reduction. So the first big message of this special topic is that to reach its development goals, Tanzania needs to recover from the recurrent slowdown described in part 1 of the report by Miguel, and then continue its impressive track record of economic growth. Since 2000, the annual GDP growth rate has averaged above 6%, with an annual per capita GDP growth rate above 3%. Macroeconomic stability has been an important ingredient to this strong track record. And with it, Tanzania was able to attract a high level of investment, which we know from growth accounting analysis was the top contributor to growth. Importantly, 3/4 of this total investment was from private sources, including foreign direct investment. So one of the key messages from looking at Tanzania's past success in driving growth is a strong partnership with the private sector. The report notes two particular challenges here. The first challenge is maintaining a healthy mix of both public and private investment. The report notes that public investment growth has substantially accelerated in recent years, and the growth of private investment has slowed. While public investment is necessary to provide public goods like roads, ports, and sources of energy, it's limited by public finances and debt sustainability considerations and can be quite expensive if it involves commercial borrowing from the market. So the majority of investment to drive growth needs to come from the private sector, both domestic and foreign sources. The second challenge is to try and emulate countries that have successfully transitioned to middle income status, which show that it's important to become more efficient in using factors of production, like capital and labor, or in other words, to improve total factor productivity, or TFP. This chart shows that Tanzania's labor productivity growth has come largely from the addition of capital, as shown in dark blue, and which is very consistent with the growth patterns in low-income countries. To raise the bar, Tanzania needs to both attract investment and increase TFP, which is shown in red, and for Tanzania has actually been declining. Higher productivity can promote diversification and increase the complexity of the country's economic activity, thus creating more and better jobs. We can see from the chart that successful middle-income countries, on average, have more balanced productivity growth from labor, more capital, and improved TFP. And accelerating the uptake of digital technologies in Tanzania can play an especially important role in bridging this gap and creating the new and better jobs that we've been talking about. Pillar 2 is perhaps the most pressing for Tanzania. Here we draw on recent work of our poverty group that shows, using the most recent household budget survey conducted by the National Bureau of Statistics, that while the economic growth that has helped the country achieve middle income status has been impressive, this growth has become less inclusive over time. So the second big message of the special topic discussion is that Tanzania really needs to focus on improving the quality of growth and translating high growth into more broadly shared welfare gains. Since 2012, income and consumption growth among the wealthiest households has outpaced growth among the poorest. And Tanzania's growth elasticity of poverty is among the lowest in the world. What explains this? Recent economic growth has been driven by sectors that employ relatively few workers, especially from poor households. Wealthier Tanzanians, particularly those in urban households with greater human capital and productive assets, were better positioned to seize opportunities generated by rapidly growing sectors, such as information and communications technology and real estate. This imbalance in economic opportunity has widened the income gap between rich and poor households. In its first year as a lower middle income country, about half of Tanzania's population was below the international extreme poverty line of $1.90 per day, which is the poverty measure we use to compare across countries, and it's different from the national poverty line measure. We look back at countries in their first year entering lower middle income status, like Tanzania has just done, and find that Tanzania's poverty is well above the 30% average for other first-year LMICs. Hence, the challenge is particularly acute for Tanzania as it becomes a middle-income country, and a key message of the report is the urgency of Tanzanian policymakers to focus on the quality of growth issue. We find that high dependency rates, low levels of education, and inadequate workforce skills limit the ability of lower-income workers to access productive employment opportunities, and these constraints are especially acute for women and youth. Poverty rates among female-headed households are 50% higher than they are among male-headed households. And poverty rates are about 11 percentage points higher among single women than they are among men. Asset ownership seems to be a particularly relevant issue here. It is significantly lower among female-headed households, especially in terms of transportation and communication. The report points to a number of directions for a path forward here. For example, cross-country experience tells us that growth reduces poverty faster when governments focus on agriculture, and in particular lifting agricultural productivity in the sector by improving agribusiness value chains. When they attract robust private investment in labor-intensive non-farm activities, including agribusiness, manufacturing, and services. And when they pay particular attention to making newly created jobs accessible to relatively low-skilled youth and women. Now turning to the last pillar 3. This pillar underscores the importance of economic security and upward mobility for Tanzania to successfully transition to a middle-income country. So the third big message of the special topic is one of emphasizing the need for resilience and for durability of welfare gains. The bottom line for this pillar is straightforward. Human capital is vital to economic security. It increases household resilience and it lowers the risk of falling back into poverty. So we see the pattern forward for Tanzania on this is to further invest in human capital and expand access to opportunities so it can reach its goal of building a secure middle class, which we know is a key feature of successful middle-income economies. The report recognizes that the middle class in Tanzania has expanded from years of economic growth, but it is still small. It's below the level of comparable first-year LMICs, and it's highly vulnerable. The share of economically secure population in Tanzania, as estimated by those with formal wage labor using ILO data, increased slightly over the past 2 decades, but the gap with where the country's own development vision is aiming and with aspirational comparators among other LMICs remains large. In the last decade, Tanzania has made significant progress in reducing its human capital gap with other low-income countries. But the gap with new aspirational peers in the lower middle income group are large. Policymakers are recognizing that human capital investments enable households at all income levels to access economic opportunities and benefit from growth, and that is critical for breaking the lack of intergenerational mobility to increase the likelihood of a child of a poor farmer to get a chance for more employment opportunities and moving to more productive economic sectors. So we call on them to redouble their efforts to make the investments in human capital now that can pay large dividends in the future. Looking forward, the report makes a strong argument for expanding access to basic services like education and health, and in particular overcoming Tanzania's low secondary school enrollment rate. We also note that financial inclusion plays a key role in fostering economic security, and that Tanzania has made tremendous gains in this area, due in no small part to Professor Ndulu's stewardship of the Bank of Tanzania, and to whom we dedicate this TEU. He was a strong proponent of addressing the last mile of remaining challenges in accessing financial services, especially for women, youth, and rural households. As I mentioned at the opening of this presentation, we see the main contribution of the special topic chapter of this TEU is to frame the dialogue around 3 strategic pillars of how Tanzania can raise the bar to reach its development goals and move beyond a focus on aggregate growth and toward the quality and durability of welfare gains for the population. We've also tried to go beyond the framing objective of the special topic chapter and use Tanzania's recent history and the experience of successful LMICs worldwide to suggest some priority areas for policy action that we think have a high potential to contribute to meeting Tanzania's Vision 2025. Each of these areas can be the focus of a TEU special topic on its own. And the report doesn't aim to fully cover these areas. Indeed, some have been the focus of past TEUs, like agricultural transformation in TEU 13, but let me briefly mention a few points on each. The first policy area is accelerating productive investment. This area is all about fostering private sector investment and growth as the main engine of job creation and economic opportunity. This will require better public-private dialogue and better policies to reduce the cost of regulatory compliance. And we've recently been invited by government to conduct a joint assessment in this area. Secondly, prioritizing human capital development. Using today's resources to make investments that yield results over a much longer time frame is often difficult. But the gains from human capital development are the most fundamental for improving the inclusiveness of growth and of broadening the security of welfare gains. And it's the highest paying for successful transition to middle income and beyond. And a large part of this agenda, as we note in the report, is addressing gender inequalities in access to basic services. The third area is enabling agricultural transformation. If you have to pick one sector with the highest immediate payoff for job creation and as an enabler for promoting higher value addition, it's agriculture. The report points to several urgent policy challenges in agriculture related to input and output markets and also the quality of public spending. The fourth area that the report discusses is around leveraging digital technologies. The COVID pandemic has forced renewed attention across the world on how best to leverage digital technologies. We have ongoing work in this area with government, recognizing the gap in access to affordable broadband, especially in more rural areas, and the tremendous potential for growth, including on digital trade. Now, the last but not least policy area is building public sector capacity. While the report has a very loud message on the importance of the private sector to be the engine of growth and to drive the creation of new and quality employment opportunities, the public sector has a tremendously critical role to play. It's central to the success of all the policy areas. The report makes points on this front, ranging from boosting efficiency of public expenditure to improving evidence-based decision-making. In conclusion, as a framing piece, the goal of this TEU special topic is to lay out what we see as priorities for what it will take to get to the next level of Tanzania's development vision. We recognize the important achievement the country has made by becoming a middle-income country. We also recognize that what it took to get Tanzania to this milestone won't be enough to reach the broader goals it has set for itself in its Vision 2025, of successfully transitioning to a middle-income country in all its dimensions. Thanks for listening to this overview of the TEU special topic, Raising the Bar, and I highly encourage you to take a look at the full report. Asante sana.
We will now proceed to the discussion portion of the 15th Tanzania Economic Update, and it's my pleasure to introduce our leaders and thinkers, our esteemed panelists that have joined us here today and are going to share their knowledge and insights. So with us today, we have Professor Honest Prosper Ngoi. He's a professor of economics. He's a researcher and consultant in economics and business at Mzumbe University. He's also the principal of Mzumbe University's Dar es Salaam College campus, and he's an expert in development economics with interest in macroeconomics, international trade, foreign direct investments, entrepreneurship, private sector development, amongst others. I think this will be very useful experience you'll have to share with us. Karibu sana, Professor Ngoi. In the center here, we have with us Dr. Blandina Kilama. She's the chairperson of the Economic Society of Tanzania, which is a non-profit organization for economic enthusiasts that promotes economic research and economic policy advocacy. She's also a senior researcher at a policy research think tank, REPOA, based in Dar es Salaam, where she's covered various work on economic transformation, financial inclusion, the SDGs, women empowerment and poverty mapping, amongst others. You're very welcome, Dr. Kilama. And with us as well is Mr. Paul Makanza. He is the Vice Chairperson of the Tanzania Private Sector Foundation and the Confederation of Tanzania Industries. He also chairs the Tanzania Startup Association Board, which is an organization that mobilizes stakeholders in the startup ecosystem to drive the development agenda. It's great to have you with us, Paul. Thank you. So I think we should dive straight in and lean on your experience here. So as we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic has plunged the global economy into a recession in 2020, and it slowed GDP growth in Tanzania as well. What are your views on foundations for solid economic recovery in 2021 and beyond? What sectors do you think might need special attention? And what are the risks for this projected recovery? I think I'll start with you, Dr. Kilama. If you could share your views on this economic recovery.
Thank you so much, Miranda. The fortunate bit before even I start sharing about the COVID-19, it's still hitting us in 2021, and we're losing people, and it's not just people, but we're really using the human resource that we need most in producing. So when we think about COVID-19 recovery, one thing that we really have to plan for strategically is how are we really going to align our human resource to ensure that we continue to produce productively, we continue to engage people in as much as unfortunately we are losing people. The second bit, I think, will also have to be along the same lines, become more innovative, just like the report that is highlighting on issues about utilizing technology that is there. And I'm happy to see Paul here, because innovation will be the way out. And for innovation to flourish, we do have to have an ecosystem that will allow for production at all levels and not excluding other members of the grouping. And lastly but not least, I think we also have to undertake a lot of strategic investment when it comes to social services. And here I'm not just limiting it on the side of the health side, but also education side, but also importantly when it comes to making sure we're really utilizing the water that we have. I know Professor Ngowi may touch on that, but people know I always touch on agriculture. We would really need to think as to how we can actually spearhead production that is inclusive. What I think is the figures that were shared here about what has transpired in 2020, you will see we were lucky because it's the goal that has lifted us. But for us to recover, we have to touch the people. And in Tanzania, we have more than 65% of people who are engaged in agriculture. So the recovery has to focus there to really lift people out. I will stop there for now.
Thank you. I will ask Professor Ngowi to chip in here. We've touched on agriculture there. Is this a special area that needs attention?
Yes, I would say so. I'll say so that agriculture is the sector that really carries a lot of people. Majority of Tanzanians are there. And of course, it has been highly touched by COVID-19, both the first and the second wave actually, through what I call intersectoral linkages. People might see COVID-19 touching tourism, hotel industry, but really, when you take what I call, the value chain approach, ecosystem approach, you find that agriculture is also being touched a lot, especially like the horticulture bit of it. I understand Dr. Kilama and others in the Sagot Center and the Agricultural Council of Tanzania in the first wave. We did some studies to see how agriculture, but specifically horticulture, was hit by COVID-19, the first wave. But to come with the responses, broadly speaking, I think policy responses are very important this time around, as it was in the first wave. And to me, I will come with two major policies that are extremely important for recovery. First, the fiscal policy and monetary policy. And I would wish to see more expansionary fiscal policy and expansionary monetary policy kind of driving the recovery. Because when you look at the impact of the COVID-19, and I've documented a lot of cases, actually almost 150, and that will be my next book coming out. I'm seeing a lot of a need for fiscal policy responses in terms of lower tax rates, in terms of tax incentives, in terms of tax exemptions, etc., etc. In the first wave, we saw like within East Africa, East African Business Council requested the governments to lower value-added tax, for example. Actually, the request was to lower to around 12%, and the request was not really accepted, so to say. Kenya lowered it to around 14% from 16%. Tanzania kept it to 18%. Nothing was done. And going back to 2008, when we had a global financial and economic crisis, value-added tax in Tanzania was 20%. It was lowered to 18%. And I think it helped with the recovery. So this time around, I believe, if it was lowered, it could help really pump life into these companies that are struggling. On the monetary policy part of it, the key issue has been around interest rates, actually, the borrowing interest rates. Thank the Bank of Tanzania, sometimes in May 2020, they came out with the policy responses to kind of support the recovery from the first wave. In terms of lowering, borrowing rates and a lot of other taxes. To me, it was important, although it came a little bit late, actually. I wish it would have come as well as it did in Kenya, as well as it did in Ghana. These countries responded with expansionary fiscal policy and monetary policy much earlier than Tanzania. And I think it helped kind of deliver a recovery. So this time around, I think these two policy responses, if well structured, they will help a lot in delivering recovery.
Thank you, Professor Ngoy. Paul Makanza, as a strong representative of the private sector who have been hit quite hard, I'd be curious to hear from you on what your views are on economic recovery.
All right. Thank you very much, Miranda. As the country director mentioned, the global economy was hard hit. We were very fortunate in Tanzania. We avoided a recession, as everybody has seen. But we did not achieve the sort of growth rates we had anticipated pre-COVID. Yeah? And therefore, recovery has to be a priority. Now, there are a couple of priority areas we need to focus on. One, I think the safety of people is very key. Yeah? Two, we need to ensure business continuity, whilst ensuring the safety of our employees. But more importantly, we will need to get consumption, investment, and exports going again. Yeah? And as Professor said, that requires a sound domestic policy measures. And from a private sector perspective, that would also include addressing what we call our pain points. Issues like the availability of land for investment, issues like raw materials in terms of quality and quantity, issues like labor in terms of skills and productivity, issues like finance in terms of access and affordability, and so on. And there's so many, obviously, the business environment needs to improve. Currently, we are ranked at 144 out of a number of countries. I think it's about time we push towards a double-digit figure. Okay, that will be very, very key. Now, what sectors need special attention? Obviously, tourism was badly hit. I've seen some numbers. Revenues actually fell by 77% versus prior year, and the industry lost about 50% of the jobs in the industry, which is very, very worrying. So, tourism and manufacturing. Those require special attention, in particular SMEs. I think the measures put in place last year to deal with COVID did not go far enough to help SMEs, and I think this is something we need to look into. In terms of risk for the projected recovery, again, the pandemic remains a huge risk, and if we do not address it appropriately, then we may erode the gains we've made on the fight against poverty reduction, and even a potential slippage back into...
Thank you very much, Paul. I think amidst this recession, we had some good news, which was Tanzania attaining lower middle income status, something that was celebrated here. And I'm just curious to know what you think the main drivers were for us to achieve this status. And secondly, do you feel that the development objectives, as stated in the Tanzania Development Vision 2025, have been achieved? I think, Dr. Kilama, I'll come back to you on that. So the main drivers of us attaining lower middle income status.
When you put a target, you may reach it when you least expect it. You always celebrate when you reach it. The best thing you can do is always to analyze what does it really entail. My two colleagues have spoken very well on issues that we need to think about when we're thinking about recovery. The advantage that Tanzania has had for quite a while is we've had a diversified economy. And some of the parts of the economy that have been hit hard, you had them. And I think this was the advantage we had as to why we managed to reach the LMIC status. Reaching there is one thing. Staying there is something else. And understanding how you operate once you're there, I think is also very important. So for me, I think it's the macro, as we heard from the country director, the stabilities that we had through that. There have been a lot of policies that are supportive, that have enhanced are seeing the macro picture. But then I'll bring in my card as a researcher. It's one thing to grow. The question is, where are you really growing? So we have the agriculture bits, we have the industry bits and the services bits. And our data currently is showing the growth is coming pretty much in the industry side and in the services. And these are the less kind of like areas where you have less people engaged. But then importantly, on the services side, this is where Paul comes in with the innovation bits that is required. You have a lot of informality, but still we were growing with informality. But once COVID hit us, it's very difficult to reorganize within the informality. The biggest challenge that we are facing now will be how do we go about to ensure that we have more inclusion of young people, of women, of people who are different, because that has worked for us before. But the question is now, with COVID-19, it looks like it's hitting everybody, and importantly, the cream. Now back to your question. So I'll say just 3 things that have led to the growth that we've seen. So yes, we've had the macroeconomic stability brought in by the discipline to guarantee us the quality that we needed. But then second, we've had a lot of infrastructural investment helping to link up different sectors. And thirdly, lastly but not least, we've been more accountable in following up different interventions that are ongoing. It's something that has been going on for a while. It was good that it happened, but we really need to protect all that for it to continue.
Thank you, Dr. Kilama. Now, Professor, I saw you nodding in agreement when Dr. Kilama said it's one thing to attain the status, but it's another thing to maintain it.
Exactly.
What are your views on this?
Yeah, essentially when it comes to attaining this level, I take it mainly to be really mainly statistics issues. The reality on the ground is another thing. It is this gross national income divided by the population, and then we should understand as an average really. And when this news was announced, I received a lot of questions to common people saying, am I really a middle income person? So really, when you average, you find that there is a lot of outliers. There are a lot of, the low-income people who have nothing to do with this, who will never be touched by this status. But broadly speaking, I think we achieved the status through, as Blandina said, decades of investment, decades of reforms. The reforms of the mid-1980s and early 1990s that changed, the business environment, that invited the private sector, both local and foreign, that, investment that we have seen in business environment, broadly speaking, in both legal, regulatory, and policy framework on infrastructure, roads, ports, airports, all those. Those have enabled now production of goods and services across all sectors, in mining, in industry, in services sector, all those I think have been major drivers of, of us achieving this status. And you remember, we achieved this 5 years too early, to put it that way. 5 years too early. That's good. That's good news. But really, the question is sustainability, remaining there. Across history, we have over 20 countries that have never remained in the same status, that have slipped back, to either low, middle income, etc., etc. So the challenge really is remaining there, and COVID-19 poses that challenge now, because it's likely to erode incomes, jobs, and really people are still on, precariously balanced in the poverty line. So there is this danger really of remain here. We are not sure 5 years down the line whether we will still be here or will have gone down to lower middle income, and God forbid. So because we want, of course, to go up. And of course, the other thing that was related to this is, on whether Tanzania has achieved now what we wanted by 2025. For sure, no? In number of issues, yes. But then, among other things, we wanted to have a robust economy, a strong economy, competitive economy, well-skilled economy. But really, we are not there yet. And it's not an issue because this is a journey. We are building Rome, and Rome is not built in a day. It's a work in progress.
Thank you very much, Professor. Paul Makanza, How do we prevent ourselves from slipping backwards?
Okay, I think my colleagues have actually touched on this on a number of interventions, but I just wanted to emphasize on the first question. The key driver over the last 2 decades was actually, massive investment into the economy, both private and the FDI. And as well as of recent times, public investment. So the big infrastructure projects Dr. Blandina was talking about. Exports used to be an important driver, but it's declined over the last couple of years. 2013, 2019, it's been actually declining on average 5%, which is also worrying. So to sustain our maker status, we really need to drive GNI, the gross national income, faster than the population growth, because those two are inversely related. Yeah, if you don't sort of manage your population well, and you have a population explosion, then gains tend to be eroded. Okay. But let me just focus on have we achieved our development visions? And I'd like to particularly focus on industry, because that's an area I'm familiar with. So basically, when we set out this vision, TDV 2025, we set ourselves particular targets for industry. Specifically, I'm talking manufacturing. So we said we want the manufacturing sector to grow by 12% come 2025. Okay. And we said by 2020 we should have achieved an 11% growth. But when you look at the actual numbers, 2019, where we have official figures, it's only 6%. So we are way behind. We would need to double our pace in order to get to that target. If you look at it in terms of share of GDP at current prices, again, we set out a target of 18%. We needed to be at 13% by 2020. We are only at 9%. Okay, again, we need to double our effort. Number of exporting firms, we had set a target of over 2,000 plus. But, the report has highlighted that, the number of exporting firms has actually fallen due to a number of issues. So essentially, we are not there. But as Professor said, this is a journey. Yeah. But it's pleasing, the government is actually revising its industrialization, integrated industrialization strategy, and I'm sure they will address some of the issues that has impeded, the pace of implementation. And one of the critical issues was the fact that when we had this integrated industrialization strategy, there was a lack of ownership. Was it Ministry of Industries? Was it Agriculture? Now, industry cuts across. Agriculture, services are supporting, enablers and so on. So there are a number of issues we would still need to implement, but we are very, very hopeful.
Thank you, Paul, for that. Professor Ngoyi, I'm going to come back to you for a moment. I want to switch gears and talk about poverty reduction, and you touched on it a moment ago. Even though Tanzania has been one of the top performers in the region, has recorded relatively high economic growth rates, why has this not translated to poverty reduction in the country?
Yeah, thank you. It's true. Tanzania has been one of those fastest growing economy within sub-Saharan Africa. It has been one of the leading, actually above the average. And even now with COVID-19, it has been above, it has been almost one of the very few economies that have still been growing. But as you have said, really, it has not reduced poverty. So we have what we call a non-poverty reducing growth, and there are a number of reasons here. In the first place, of course, you look at the sectors that are growing. The sectors that have been growing are mainly what we call capital-intensive sectors, sectors that are driven by machines, automation, and stuff, that really do not employ so much people. They are mainly mechanized. So, like mining, transport, social services, all those, as opposed to agriculture meaning, crops, production, livestock, and fishing, which has been growing around 3%, 4%. And these are mainly labor intensive. So those sectors that are growing, from the theory of factor productivity, the factor production that is used in the sectors that are growing is the one that gets paid, so to say. So it is capital that has been receiving a lot of payment than labor in that context. But also we have seen poor intersectoral linkages. Sectors that have been growing very fast, like mining, transportation, financial services, etc., are not so much linked with the sectors that are growing very slowly. You would find mining in Mwanza, mining in Shinyanga growing very fast, but then consuming beef, you name it, from Australia, beef from South Africa, you know, not from Mwanza, not from Shinyanga. So the moment there is no this intersectoral linkages, you miss a trickle-down effect. So as a result, really, people who are poor are not really participating so much and enjoying, you know, the fruit of, you know, the fruit of the growth itself. But the other thing is the question of distribution and redistribution. Because what is supposed is, although there are some sectors that are growing faster than others, really proper distribution and redistribution, mainly through taxation, through fiscal policy, through subsidies, for example, they would uplift the people who are poor. I'm not saying that this has not been done in Tanzania. It has been done, but a lot more needs to be done. Maybe the last one is, in this context now, is the question of, you know, is this growth inclusive? You know, who participate into this growth? Normally, for example, the sectors that are growing, they are mainly knowledge intensive. So people who are not highly skilled, not so much linked, you know, really they do not participate into this growth part. And so the moment you are not participating in the growth, you do not also enjoy the part of the cake that has grown. So those are part of really factors that I've explained this non-poverty reducing growth. And that's why the debate actually has been now, it's not the question of just celebrating, posting impressive growth figures. The question is this the desired growth? Growth that is reducing, poverty reducing, that is inclusive, but also that is green in terms of, you know, environment. Yes.
Thank you, Professor. I will come to Dr. Kilama now just to hear your views as well on the correlation between our economic growth and poverty reduction.
What Prof was saying in summary is pretty much we are saying there is a lot of room for improvement in the way the structural transformation is happening in Tanzania. When you think about growth, as is likely pointed out, the productivity of any growth is going to come either from capital or from labor. In Asia, we are seeing lots of transformation is coming from the labor bits. And for us, we do have a lot of room that would allow to see improvement that are benefiting the labor. For instance, I think I said this at the beginning, our biggest contributor is mining, but then again, the productivity is coming from capital. And one additional thing, because I think when the country director was presenting, also touched on informality. Unfortunately, again, if you look into mining, you see a lot of people, including women, engaged in mining informally. And these are some of the areas that we can actually improve a lot. In the stuff, when you look into construction, it's the same thing. You see the figures are showing there is a lot of growth, but once you look into the integrated labor force survey data coming from Tanzania, it's already showing you have a lot of people who are engaged in this sector informally. So for us to really benefit and see poverty reduction, and not necessarily just poverty reduction, but improvement in livelihoods of people, we will really have to have policies that are touching people at the lowest level. And just to add a little bit of a complete picture here, we're not saying when you use machines it's bad, but we are saying you need to build the capacity of people to also produce and earn reasonably well. If what we are earning or what we are recording is being earned is by a machine, it means there is room where we can improve and have more and more people, and in particular, when I say young people, I always son to Paul, it doesn't mean he's young, but like, because he works a lot with young people. He works a lot with young people. Like, we need a lot of young people, and in particular for my case, then also women, to get rewards. And at this particular point, I'll bring in the point about when we talk about having women working and getting rewards. Very quickly in this discussion, we've had it before with Professor Ngowi. When you're thinking about engaging women, most of the formal work that is done globally only recognize people who work for 8 hours. Women work in the informal sector not by choice. but it's because they also have this burden of care that they have to undertake to care for their families, to make sure everybody has had a meal. If there is a sick person, we all look into a woman, they're looking at me, yes. And if you want anything that has to be sorted out in the household, we look at this woman. So at the end of the day, the woman will never have 8 hours to be recognized and work in the formal sector, so she ends up in the informal sector. And I think one of the debate that is going on now, it's very important to have a universal social safety net, also including women, because we care for everybody else, but our time is never recognized. So I think when you're talking about the poverty and growth, in as much as we look into the numbers and people are being excluded, but if you look at the lens of the women, then that is different. And I'm sure Paul, if he starts looking at the young people, he will also say they get punished for not having the recognizable experience that is needed for them to really be included. And then at the end of the day, have this upward mobility where at the end of the day we'll say, yes, now we are rising and we should be rising better. I think I'll stop there for now.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts. We've actually segued nicely now, Paul, for you to share with us how you think Tanzania can sustain and accelerate its economic growth in the medium term, but specifically, what do you think the role of the private sector is, the quality of business environment, human capital investment in Tanzania's growth strategy?
I think there are five things we can do to accelerate economic growth in the medium to long term. But let me just focus on three, and I will mention these briefly. One, again, I go back, we need to drive investment, okay? Two, we need to create access to opportunities for the women, for the young people, for the regions that have been left behind and so on, yeah? But again, agricultural transformation is very key, because this is where you have a lot of people working, okay? But poverty is also very, very rampant within this particular sector. And upward mobility is important, as Dr. Blandina has said, okay? And that requires investment in, human capital. Yeah? That's very, very key. But, it's a catch-22. You need the money to invest in, all these other initiatives so you can get your human capital index up. But critically important, upward mobility to, get away from this circle of poverty within the agricultural sector. But again, investment into a number of areas. Now, what is the role of the private sector? Undoubtedly, investment. As I said before, it is investment that drove a lot of the economic growth in the last 2 decades, and 2/3 of that was actually private investment. Okay, private. So you can see, 75% of, a big chunk of our growth, yeah, came from investment, private sector investment, especially into mining. And again, now we're having a huge public sector investment, but that's not sustainable in the long run, because then, you may be putting pressure on the fiscus. So the role is a driver, the key driver of the engine of growth for the economy through investment. We do need, if I got your second question correctly, you asked about the quality of the business environment. Now, there's room for improvement. There is room for improvement. Fortunately, we are engaging the government as a private sector on a number of occasions. In fact, the level of interaction has actually increased. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, we can no longer do face-to-face. But you do see a real commitment to address a number of the issues that we face. And those issues, as I talked about before, were the hard sort of pain points: land, availability, quality of raw material. You may have a factory like Bakresa producing, juices, but then again, the fruit farmers cannot supply the quality or the quantity. So sometimes he has to import, the fine powder. I don't know what you call it. Yeah, concentrate. Yeah. So basically, we have an issue of quality and quantity. Power. We are investing a lot into power generation, but again, we still have an issue of access and reliability. Yeah, we still have ups and downs, and then most importantly, you need the skills, labor. Yeah, unfortunately, in Tanzania, we seem to have a dichotomy between what we demand and what we produce. So if you look at the numbers, we are training 3 managers for 1, technician. It should be the other way around. Yeah. You should have many technicians under 1 manager, but not the other way. A flipped pyramid. And then the regulatory environment, changing the goalpost, is something the private sector does not like. In the middle of the game. Finance, again, access and cost, and this is really hampering the very creative young people. I work with them, I see what they can do, but they have a constraint in terms of, they are never short of ideas, brilliant ideas. But when it comes to finance, it's a huge struggle. And this is something we really need to look into to unlock the creativity of this young generation. Thank you.
So creating a more conducive ecosystem for young people as well. I'm curious to know what policies you think should be implemented, Professor Ngoi, in order to accelerate job creation and poverty reduction. What do we need?
I've always believed on there's 2 major policies that I've started with again. Both the fiscal and monetary policy really are very important. On the, what Paul is telling us on the youth and the inability of youth accessing capital, I also deal a lot with the youth in terms of entrepreneurship. Really, they are full of ideas, but now when it comes to accessing funds, really, it's an issue. And it's an issue in various areas, now including on the interest rate, for example. Interest rate that has been charged is relatively high, really. And I understand partly because I sit in as a board of director in one of the banks. I understand why the rates are the way they are. There are issues of cost and stuff. But really, if we have a proper monetary policy that focuses on interest rates that are friendly to youth, interest rates that can be waived on youth enterprises, for example, this could help a lot of young men and women to establish their own enterprises, to employ themselves, to, those kind of stuff. Because really, that's mainly the stumbling block. Although really, at the end of the day, when there is good business idea, good entrepreneurial idea, money will always be there. But of course, interest rate has been one of those major issues to quite a lot of people. Now, the other thing when it comes to the question of fiscal policy, issues of taxation, is a lot of people would like to start their enterprises, but really, when they think of tax amnesty, normally it is mainly linked to large investors, So this becomes again one of those stumbling blocks, especially for youth. But now, to go a little bit back to what Paul was telling us on the public investment, this is something that I wanted to add my voice on. Yes, there is a lot of public investment that has been going around, building roads, ports, airports, you name it. What have been missing, or rather we could add in order to sustain growth, is really local content. Local content. All this big infrastructure, quite good, no problem at all. But then when I'm looking the local content in terms of local firms, local companies that are part and parcel of these equations, that actually would retain a lot of money back home and reinvest the money in the local economy, in this way expanding the growth. I really miss it. But I understand sometimes it's the question of quantity, it's the question of quality, because what I want is the best rail. Whether it's made from Turkey or Tanzania, I want the best rail. If the Turkish are the ones who are making it best, I want it best. So there are now question of capacity building to the local firms. And then he talked also about investment climate. Our focus has always been attracting investment. And I've written a lot really on that, FDI, for over 20 years now. But I think now the focus has to be not only attracting, but also retaining. There is a danger of having what I call flagging out. Investors would come because you have attracted them. If the investment does not continue to be good in terms of legal policy, regulatory framework, as he has correctly said, in terms of skills and talent in the labor market, and when it comes to skills, not only hard skills, but also soft skills, infrastructure, not only hard infrastructure, but also soft, internet, the speed of internet, the safety of internet, and all those, they will flag out. So I think there is a need of having a dedicated effort of retaining investors who are already in this country.
Thank you, Professor. Dr. Kilama, I will come to you, and I'm just curious to know, to go back to this idea of accelerating job creation and poverty reduction, what role can agriculture, productivity, human capital, or social protection play in this?
That's a good question. And I'll just start where they ended. Unfortunately, lots of times when we speak about agriculture, we tend to look at one actor, and in most cases, the farmer. And I think in both some of the points that both Prof. Ngoyi and Paul have raised, I think it's now a high time that whenever we want to look into agriculture, we have to start at the markets. If we start there, then we're going to be assured the quality is going to be met, the quality that is needed by the market, and also the quantity will follow. Because it's one thing to say, farmers are not producing, while we know several months when we go to Iringa, suddenly the roads are red because we have all these, tomatoes that are being rotten. So when you think about really creating jobs and really spearheading development of the people in Tanzania, it's very important to start in the middle and then think about the farmer. But then, unfortunately, our farmers have been used as a token. I'm going to call it a political token. Good for the votes. And then we'll be like, we give you subsidy, but then we don't give subsidies to the manufacturers. They should be the guys who are given the subsidies, because they're the ones who are processing. And then with that then, integrated into that, then it's very important when we say we want to provide Ugani, now I need to know this in Kiswahili. We need to, extension services. I was having services, extension was running away. Extension services. These extension services should be determined by the manufacturers, not the guys who came from school. Sorry, I love the youth, but when they're like, I want employment, you're like, okay, you can be an extension. No. These people have to be experienced. They have to have worked with manufacturers to be given these jobs. And then once they go and tell the farmers, we want avocado the size of a hand, they should not go like, when I was growing up, I was eating avocado size of my head. No, that's what the company wants, and that's what we produce. That linkage is very important, and all the other soft skills that we had, and the other skills, the hard skills that are needed to ensure that then agriculture become more meaningful. Because as long as we continue to say, the market is going to be determined by, let's say, the society, the primary society, or even the corporate society. At the end of the day, we're not giving any economic freedom to the farmer. Once the farmers have an economic freedom, we will never, ever, ever again hear, you're not allowed to cut off your cashew. You're not allowed to. No. If it's not paying, I'm cutting it off. If it's paying, I'll do it. If I've linked up with the private sector, I'll do it. But if I'm not, it won't happen. I think our farmers are the best. They know everything. If you force them, they stop. It's not, they don't want to do it. They know it doesn't pay. If it pays them, they'll go ahead and do it. In the cashew area where I've worked, the years whereby they get a lot of earnings, the next year they attend their farms. The year they don't get enough earnings, the next year they slice up their farm. They just maintain a few, then they can get the earning. So I think this holistic approach, and this is what I'm also hearing from my colleagues, is very important. We need to be very predictable with what we are saying, not just to the farmers, but to the facilitators, to the companies that want to add value. We provide what they want. And then at the end of the day, the government then should simply be the facilitator of ensuring the ecosystem is operating, but not become like also in the middle of that kind of like investing, because we understand if you allow more players, that innovation is going to come out. If you restrict and you only have one player who is also a regulator, who is going to regulate the regulator? That's very difficult. That's why we want the private sector, and we want to enhance the quality of the regulators so that they can follow and make sure whatever is produced at the safety level that not only is safe to us, but also safe to everybody else. It shouldn't be like we're producing for export at the quality that is needed for export, but the safety in Tanzania, who cares? No, no, no. It should be, first, we care about the safety of Tanzanians, then second, we care about when we export, we also meet all these other qualities. And then the last bit I think I can touch on is on development funds. They've implied, but I think it's very important, and I think in Tanzania we've tried now, and I think we can continue learning on how to utilize them. This is the fund that can be used when it's leveraged with what is coming out from the private sector. It can do a lot. What's my worry now, what I see a lot is like, when this fund is there, it's like the people who are overseeing it, they also want to be engaged. They're like, hey, hands off. Just oversee who is going to implement this project that are going to touch all these people who are engaged in agriculture through the entire value chain. And I think with that, we should be in good hands.
Thank you, Dr. Kilama. You've touched on many things there. I want to move to Paul Makanza now and basically question you here on, one of the key features of a middle-income country is a solid middle class. And I think we also know that the majority of Tanzanians, even though they may have escaped poverty to some degree, are still hovering around the poverty line and are vulnerable to falling back as well. So from your perspective, what policies do you think can boost and secure a middle class in Tanzania?
It's been touched on in the report, and I'm sure my colleagues will have a number of interventions as well. You see, the middle class in Tanzania is very small. Yeah, if some of the numbers I've seen, it's less than 10%. In between. Yeah. So, should we worry about the middle class, or should we be worrying about the less fortunate? Yeah, I would actually worry about the less fortunate because they are big in numbers. Yeah, what policies would I put in place? Basically, and I'll just focus on industrialization again. Our government, had a beautiful, strategy for industrialization. Yeah. You had interesting ideas like EPZ, industrial parks, and so on. What sort of products to focus on? Okay, I love the idea of industrial parks. Okay, because this is where you can actually get a lot of people well organized in order to be able to service them, whether it's to provide the infrastructure or the financing and so on. In particular, women. Women actually, if you go to a number of these SMEs exhibitions, it's 90%, 99% are women. Yeah, we need to promote, on a practical level, we do need to promote these industrial parks, okay, and provide the infrastructure, provide the access to financing and so on. So I will just end there, but I would love more to focus the middle class, like Professor, Doctor, and I. We are fine for now. It's the little ones who are,
Thank you very much. Thank you, Paul. We've all read the report, obviously, part 1 and part 2, looking at the economic outlook, but also at our development agenda, sustaining this growth, maintaining lower middle income status, aspiring to be middle income country in the future. I now turn to you for your final takeaway and commentary on what you'd like our listeners to take away from the report from your perspective. I'll start with you, Professor Ngoy.
Thank you. Launching this report with the environment that we are in with COVID-19, I think my focus would be making sure that we address all the economic impacts that we have seen being brought by COVID-19, both the first wave and the second wave, but really learning from the past, because it's not the first time that we are coming with an economic crisis like this one. 2008, we had the global financial economic crisis with issues more or less like this one, So if we are to sustain and remain a middle-income country, we have to address the economic impacts of COVID-19, which are likely to be long-term, really, if not well addressed. So really, policy responses to COVID-19 now, but also all other responses, health responses, etc., have to be really focused so that we do not fall back into, you know, the lower class that we just graduated from just last year, you know. So really addressing the economic impact of COVID-19 with the proper policy responses, learning lessons from similar contexts. We had, you know, we had like a case like Ebola. It might have been a little bit minor, but then learning how it was addressed, learning how other economic crises have been addressed across the world, even going back into history. We had the Great Depression in the 1930s. We know how countries really escaped this. So let's use the knowledge that is around, actually.
Thank you, Professor. A message of positivity there and learning from past experience. Dr. Kilama, your final thoughts.
I think just in addition to what Prof said, I think for me, the biggest message is not to forget the big picture. The interventions that we try to undertake now, in as much as they're needed, they should not interfere in the long-term perspective that we have. I think that will be very important in ensuring that we are including as many people as possible. The one thing that I touched, and I'm going to say, like I know Paul will also touch on it, is this embracing technology in improving efficiency of both capital and labor in particular. I think is providing us with a great room to see a lot of upward mobility, and also including the people who have been excluded. And with that, at the end of the day, improving livelihoods of people. And I think that would be the only word I say. Coupled all this is having predictable policies. Is going to be very, very important. As we've heard, the business community, they prefer that. When you're not predictable, then they're not sure what to do. And I think those are the two things.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kilama. Paul Makanza, final thoughts.
My colleagues have covered the issues pretty well, but let me just mention three. I think very critically important is we need to sustain our ELMIC, status. Yeah, so recovery in the short term will be important. Okay, and the fiscal monetary policies need to be sound to ensure that recovery. But again, equally important, quality growth rather than quantity alone, as my colleagues have mentioned before, because we need to include a bigger chunk of our population into this growing pie. As we stabilize, recover, we need to move upward mobility. And this is where it gets interesting. We can become very creative, tap into technologies, and basically, again, I go back, we have a number of very creative young people, yeah? And this creativity, what amazes the most is the fact that we can actually sort of create technologies that actually fit our environment and address some of the constraints we have in some of the big sectors like agriculture and so on. So those are my 3 points. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to our 3 esteemed panelists today for sharing your thoughts, your insights on the 15th Tanzania Economic Update. We do appreciate having you here. Paul Makanza, Dr. Blandina Kilama, Professor Ngoi, thank you for being here today. I would now like to welcome the World Bank Country Director to give us her key takeaways and closing remarks on the report as it stands. Welcome back, Mara.
On behalf of the World Bank team, I would first of all like to thank Professor Ngoi, Dr. Blandina, and Mr. Makanza for their insightful comments and the vibrant discussion that we have heard today. I'd also like to very much thank our moderator, Miranda, for leading that discussion so skillfully. As I was listening to the discussion today, there were several things that really came to the fore for me that I would like to highlight. The first of these is that undoubtedly these are challenging times for the world as well as for Tanzania. And while the short-term recovery is extremely important, as we have heard today, it's also very important for us to continue to keep the long-term perspective in mind. The quality of growth of Tanzania is going to be particularly important during this recovery period. We've also heard a lot about the importance of focusing on inclusivity, and in particular, the importance of women and youth, and making sure that as the country moves forward in its economic development, that these groups and other vulnerable groups are fully included in economic activity and able to take full advantage of the economy. We've heard about the important role of the private sector to generate jobs and how crucial that is going to be, especially in the agricultural sector going forward, to ensure that Tanzania can have a vibrant economy that will lead it sustainably into a middle-income country status. We also talked about embracing technology and the importance that technology can bring in supporting all of these other reforms and economic development. And finally, as we look to the future, we heard the importance of focusing on greater economic security for all Tanzanians. So those who are brought out of poverty do not run the risk of falling back in again if there is another shock. So on that basis, I would like to again thank you all for joining us today and for the vibrant discussion, and to all those who have watched and listened to this, thank you very much.